Hello everyone, and welcome back to Lifting the Veil. It's been a little bit since I've been able to release an episode, but today we're going to be doing episode 4 of the series Constellations. In episode 4, we're going to be talking all about the flood. So without further ado, let's get started. You know, if ever there was proof that the Earth isn't a sphere spinning in the nothingness of space, it is the biblical flood event. So let's take a look at the scripture regarding the flood and see what it has to say. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, on the 17th day of the month, on that day all the fountains of the great deep burst open, and the floodgates of the sky were open. The rain fell upon the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. Genesis 7:11 through 12. We see two interesting phrases in that passage. The phrases fountains of the deep and floodgates of the sky need to have special attention paid to them. The deep is the surface that God inscribed the circle of the earth into. And this passage of scripture indicates that the waters below that surface erupted from beneath the ground and played a part in flooding the earth. Next, we have the floodgates of the sky opening, and this is more than just rain. The term floodgates indicates a physical opening that took place to allow large amounts of water to pour down upon the face of the earth from the waters that are above the firmament. Looking back to our episode regarding the firmament, we can understand that the physical structure of the sky or heavens is called the firmament, and that it would have gates that could be opened. We also know, according to scripture, that there is water above the firmament. So naturally, it would make sense that if the gates in the firmament were open, that water would pour down. Now, in order to flood the entire earth, it would take more than just rain to do so. I mean, let's think about what rain is for just a moment. Rain is the water that is drawn into the clouds through evaporation. So even if all of the water on the earth were to be pulled up and rain back down, it would only be the same amount of water that was already present on earth. And that isn't enough to flood the whole earth, or else the earth would have already been flooded from the beginning. It took water from an external source, such as fountains of the great deep and the waters of the firmament, to reach the level of flooding recorded in the biblical account. 40 days the flood kept coming on the earth, and as the waters increased, they lifted the ark high above the earth. The waters rose and increased greatly on the earth, and the ark floated on the surface of the water. They rose greatly on the earth, and all the high mountains under the entire heavens were covered. The waters rose and covered the mountains to a depth of more than 15 cubits. Genesis 7:17 through 20. According to the previous passage of scripture, even the tallest mountains were completely submerged under water, and the water continued to rise above the tallest peaks by 15 cubits, which is approximately 22.5 feet. We know that Mount Hermon is approximately 9,232 feet tall. Now, I used Mount Hermon because it is the tallest mountain in that region that I'm aware of. So now, imagine 9,254.5 feet of water at a minimum, covering the entire surface of the earth. Now imagine that surface being a sphere. For years, Christians have understood and believed that there was a worldwide flood. However, what I can't wrap my head around is how they myself included until a few years ago, believed it happened on a spherical planet spinning in space. How do you flood a ball? Seriously, how does a spherical shape flood on its surface? And the answer is that it doesn't. It can't, and physics come into play here, so stay with me. In order for water to be gathered, it requires a container, and we have understood this for thousands of years. So, an example, take a baseball and glue on various objects all over the ball to represent mountains. Now take that adorned baseball and hold it under the faucet until every item glued to it is completely submerged in water. No matter how long you hold it there, none of them will be submerged. Now, take a plate and glue it into a tub of some sort. Adorn the plate with the same objects to represent mountains. Begin to pour water into the tub until every object is completely submerged. And it won't take long before the entire thing is underwater and the water will continue to rise above it. Now, that was a very simple demonstration, but effective. And the reason this works is due to the physics of water. Water always seeks and finds its level. The surface of water is always level. And it does not matter the shape of the container, the surface of the water will always be level. The fact that there is no level surface on a sphere is the reason the baseball didn't flood. But according to science, Earth is a sphere, and is much larger than a baseball, but a sphere is still a sphere. Without a level surface, water doesn't gather. Yet we have many bodies of water on Earth with perfectly level, flat, and still surfaces. We have salt flats in Utah that cover 40 square miles of land that are perfectly flat. They are so perfectly flat that when it rains, the water is able to cover the surface, creating a perfect mirror image of the sky. Now, this should be impossible on a spherical Earth. NASA gives us the measurements of curvature at 8 inches per mile square. That means for every mile, there should be 8 inches of curvature present. So for a 40-mile stretch of land, according to the calculation given to us by the scientific community, there should be 1,060 feet of curvature. However, those 40 square miles of salt flats in Utah have zero curvature. They're perfectly flat. And we'll talk more about curvature later. So let's get back to the flood. How did the Earth flood if it is a sphere? Maybe we're asking the wrong question. Perhaps we should ask, what does Scripture tell us about the shape of the Earth? If we trust what the Scriptures tell us, and we should, it is circular in shape and carved into the face of the deep. That alone destroys the globe deception that we have been fed. It also has a firmament, a solid dome, over it, which acts as an enclosure. The engraving of the circle would have created a recess or walls that surround the Earth. And that makes perfect sense when we think about the fact that water needs a container and the fact that the seas have boundaries set for them. Let's take a look at the Hebrew cosmological model, and I think you'll see that it differs greatly from what we expect based on our current heliocentric model. As you can see here, the Hebrew model has the Earth set upon pillars. And then those pillars are called the foundations of the Earth. You've got the waters below the firmament, which would be our seas. You have the firmament with the sun and the moon and the stars. Then you have the waters above the firmament, and at the very top, according to this model, is the heaven of heavens, the divine dwelling. As we know from other sources, there's more than one firmament, and things are laid out a little bit differently, but this was the general understanding to whoever created this graphic. And when we read the scripture for exactly what it says, it's not difficult to understand why the Hebrew people had this concept of cosmology. In fact, almost all civilizations had a similar concept. For thousands of years, this was the understood model of Earth. Different cultures called heaven and hell different things, different words for firmament, different ideas of a foundation, but the concept was the same. And it wasn't until about 600 or 700 years ago that the heliocentric model was adopted. So why for thousands of years was a biblical concept of the cosmos accepted, and then suddenly, a few hundred years ago, it got changed? And I'll answer that question in a later episode. For now, let's stick to the flood. If we turn to an extra biblical text, we can gain more supporting evidence for the Hebrew model as well as the biblical description of Earth and the cosmos. Now, I'm going to look at a passage from the book of Enoch describing the flood. So, before we get started, if you find yourself asking, why am I using a book that's not in the Bible? Why am I pulling from the book of Enoch? I'm going to link a video that I have where I had a discussion with a pastor concerning biblical canon and how we got the canon we have today versus what it was prior to, and some of the things that transpired to make sure that Enoch was removed. So if you want to check that out, I think it's a great discussion that may clear up some questions for you and explain why I believe that the book of Enoch is scripture. So with that in mind, let's take a look at a passage from 1 Enoch that describes the flood. And one of those four went to that white bull and instructed him in a secret. Without his being terrified, he was born a bull and became a man, and built for himself a great vessel and dwelt thereon. And 3 bulls dwelt with him in that vessel, and they were covered in. And again I raised mine eyes towards heaven, and saw a lofty roof, with 7 water torrents thereon, and those torrents flowed with much water into an enclosure. And I saw again, and behold, fountains were opened up, the surface of that great enclosure, and that water began to swell and rise upon the surface. And I saw that enclosure, till all its surface was covered with water. And the water, the darkness and mist increased upon it. And as I looked at the height of that water had risen above the height of that enclosure, and was streaming over that enclosure. And it stood upon the earth, and all the cattle of that enclosure were gathered together, until I saw how they sank and were swallowed up and perished in that water. But that vessel floated on the water, while all the oxen and elephants and camels and asses sank to the bottom with all the animals, so that I could no longer see them, and they were not able to escape, but perished and sank into the depths. It's 1 Enoch 89, 1-6. And this is a prophetic dream that Enoch is sharing with his son, Methuselah. This is a prophecy of the flood that would come as a result of the sons of God, the angels, leaving heaven and sinning by taking wives. Those actions would lead to a corrupt world where only evil was continually in the hearts and minds of those living on the earth. The bull symbolism represents Noah and his 3 sons. The other animal references, oxen, elephants, camels, asses, etc., were actually referencing everyone else, including the fallen angels that had taken on flesh. And remember, they had taken wives from the daughters of Cain and their offspring. The Nephilim, or giants, had corrupted all flesh on earth except Noah and his sons. This was the reason behind the flood. It was intended to wipe the corrupt DNA from the face of the earth in order to preserve a pure bloodline for the Messiah to be born from. Now, before I get too off topic, let's break this down for the purpose of this series. We can see that everything from the Genesis account of the flood is present. The great vessel he built was the ark. The lofty roof seen when he looked up was the firmament. The 7 water torrents pouring down were the waters pouring from the floodgates of heaven. The fountains that were opened on the surface were the fountains of the great deep that burst forth. Everything from Genesis is here, along with one other phrase that ties everything we've looked at so far together with a neat little bow. The word enclosure is the final piece of the puzzle. Enoch was seeing this through a vision. He had a bird's eye view of the earth and could see that the waters were pouring into an enclosure. Considering the physics of water, this makes perfect sense. It makes a lot more sense than trying to do the mental gymnastics required to make this worldwide flood work on a spherical object. We've already determined that you can't flood a ball. When we take everything that we have talked about up to this point, we are left with 2 choices. We will either believe what the Bible says about Earth and our cosmos, or we will renounce Scripture and agree with the fallen world system of cosmology that we're presented with every day. And considering Scripture is God-breathed, I will choose to go with what He says about His creation. After all, He is the one that made everything that exists today. Now, we've covered a lot of biblical information concerning the Earth and our cosmos in previous episodes. And in this episode, we covered the flood in detail. So, in future episodes, I'm going to make a small shift from the biblical narrative, and we're going to begin to look at some historical events that have transpired. These will force us to question the model that is widely accepted as fact. And I do warn you that we're about to get into even deeper territory. So brace yourself for the episodes that are upcoming. Continue to pray. Seek God as we go throughout this series. Ask Him to guide you into all understanding and open your eyes to truth. All right, so you have made it to the end of episode 4, where we discuss the flood. Future episodes are coming to look at some of those historical events as promised. But first, I just want to thank you for making it to the end of this episode. Guys, you can help me out major. If you haven't already, go ahead and hit the thumbs up on this video, subscribe to my channel, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss those future promised episodes. Another great way you can support the channel is by a channel membership. I do have memberships open. You get some perks for that, such as icons by your name and access to exclusive emojis during live content. Another great way to support me is through Patreon. I want to take this time to thank my existing Patreon supporters and my existing channel members. I could not do what I do without you, so thank you all very much. And I want to thank those of you who have not come on board yet, but you're thinking about it. If you appreciate this channel and you enjoy the content I produce, consider supporting me through one of the available tiers on Patreon. It just helps to ensure that I'm able to keep doing this and that I'm able to make each video better, and I can reduce the amount of time between episodes. A lot goes into this, and it does require external support. So I thank you for your consideration there. Another way you can support me is through my shop. I've got some t-shirts, coffee mugs, sweaters, and a whole lot of other goods available through that merchandise shop. That also supports this channel. And last but not least, my books. I have a link to my website. You can access the books that I've written concerning biblical cosmology and other biblical topics, as well as my first fiction book, which you can see on the shelf behind me here, Dream Warrior. So guys, check that stuff out and help support what I've got going on with Lifting the Veil. One more time, I want to thank you for sticking around to the end of this video. Don't forget to have those notifications turned on so you don't miss the future episodes that are coming. Thanks guys so much, and as always, I'll see you next time.